Adventists so much for the opportunity to be sharing this very important subject. I noticed that many people were not here last week, and there were some loose ends that were apparent in the comments last week. And so what I want to do is I want to just recap and give the premise of what we've accomplished and where we're going. And today we'll be looking into Adventist history to bear it out. The premise is this: there is a great controversy. We all acknowledge that, but this great controversy enters into even in the sphere of nature and the way we view man, and the way, therefore, that disease is treated. We find very clearly that there is man's way of solving disease, and there is God's way of solving disease. I thought that a very good place to start would be actually in the book of 2 Kings 5. 2 Kings 5 lays out this these parallel systems, I would say. And we find in 2 Kings 5, looking at verse 2, and the Syrians had gone by the companies and had brought away captives of the land of Israel, the little maid, and she waited on Naaman's wife. We find a little girl being captive in Syria, and they're taking care of Naaman's wife. And we know the story in verse 1. It says he was a captain of the hosts, the king of Syria, a great man with his master, and honorable. And so he was highly honored. But it says in the last part of that verse, he was also a mighty man in valor, but he was a leper. If there is any disease that is feared back then and some today, it's the disease of leprosy. We face we face Naaman, and Naaman takes a letter with him in verse 6, and he comes and he brings it down. And the king says, "Oh, this is too much for me. I need to send him to the prophet." And in verse 8 it says, "And when Elijah, the man of God, had heard of the king of Israel had rent his clothes, that he sent to the king, saying, 'Wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes? Let him come now to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel.'" That is the conviction that Elisha has. There is a prophet in Israel, and Naaman and Elisha sent a message unto Naaman, and said, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean." Well, imagine you are second, third in command in Syria, and you get this message: go and do some hydrotherapy. Go and wash in the Jordan. Now, he had an answer, Naaman did, to Elisha, and his question was, "Are not Abana and Pharpar rivers of Damascus better than the waters of Israel?" In other words, isn't our water better than that water? May I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in rage. We find that a kind servant turns to him and says, "My father, if the prophet had asked thee to do something great, wouldn't thou have done it? How much rather then when he said to thee, wash and be clean. Verse 14, then he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Here we find Naaman put aside his idea of his system being better than God's system and obeying these commands. It includes hydrotherapy. It also includes exercise, because he went down into the river. Not to rent the story or give it too much of our human conjecture. This is enough. That God has a way that doesn't seem right to a man, but the ends thereof are the way of life. This was the case in the case of Naaman. And coming back to our paradigm of understanding, there is this split idea in how man is treating his diseases. This dualistic mindset has pervaded every sphere of education. And a dear doctor said to me, it hasn't only educated education, Ricky, it's educated our view of life. And this is where we all need to acknowledge that we are all dualistic in our thinking. And God needs to save us from that. So it's not they are dualistic and we are not dualistic. Let us identify and say, God, please save us from our dualism. So last week, I went through this study of when God raised Adam and Eve, and their obedience to God was the way of life, and their disobedience to God, which they followed in the lie that Satan had, was the way of death. The inference over there is that Satan in the lie exalted nature above God, and when you do that, you do away with God's stipulations and obedience to God. And this is one of the principles that is so important for us to take into consideration. The very interesting situation as far as how it's affected medicine. I found out in 1856 or 1857, that is when the first hospital in Austria was established, where there was different specialties for the part of man. So man was even divided further. What are we saying? We are saying that the tendency is to look at man as treatable on a very divided basis. To divide him up even more. So the reductionist way of looking at life is where we are in medicine. This is what we are having to grapple with, and the opposite of this the reductionist attitude is the wholeness of man. And this is what we've been trying to establish. God dealing with man as a whole. It says, I am the Lord who forgiveth all your sins, who healeth all your diseases. That is Hebrew parallelism. There is the word in Greek for healing and for salvation is the same. It points to this wholesome unity of man. That being said, I want to just remind you again that we started off, we got to 1844 last week, and we saw the the message that came in the first angel's message. The message was, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made the heaven and the earth. That is putting God where he belongs. Contrary to that was the teaching of Darwinian evolution, which was doing away with God in many respects, at best, or at worst. And there have been attempts to have theistic evolution. But 1844 significant in that the manuscript for Darwinian for Origin of the Species was in its infancy. We got to 1876, and this is where we've been. I'm going to switch to my screen over here. So 18, I hear some voices. So 1876. Yeah. Do you have a question? I guess not. So in 1876, we have the call for we have two roads developing in health, and this is just a recap again. The two journeys of health, where we have John Harvey Kellogg being called to Battle Creek to treat man as a whole, and we have the setting up of, or the founding of the Johns Hopkins University. And here we found last week that the call and the founding in the Johns Hopkins University experience, it was founded on Darwinian evolution. And therein is the divided man. That is when medicine set out on a trajectory of denying God in science. That was the founding principle of the school of the Johns Hopkins, at least the School of Biology. And so we've got the call, and we've got the founding of Johns Hopkins University, and that's where I wanted to pick up this week, because the next thing that we'll do is we'll go to the nature of disease. If we understand the wholeness of man and the divided man, there is a responding view of what disease is following that. So the Johns Hopkins University was founded by a board, and this board called Thomas Huxley to do the inaugural address. Now, Thomas Huxley, for those who don't know, Thomas Huxley was a humanist. He was also called Darwin's bulldog. What he was enthusiastic to promote the findings of Darwin and push it to its next level. This is what he said concerning the process of science, and this should give us some pause. Pause. He says, "Sit down before fact as a little child. Be prepared to give up every preconceived notion. Follow humbly wherever and to whatever abysses nature leads, or you shall learn nothing." I have only begun to learn content and peace of mind since I have resolved at all risk to do this. These are the words of Thomas Huxley. Well, Thomas Huxley didn't stop at that. He did for the founding of the biology department. I said it was founded on Darwinian evolution. He installed a gentleman by the name of Henry Newell Martin. Henry Newell Martin was one of his prime students back in England. And Henry Newell Martin and him wrote a book called The Principle of Biology. And the principle of biology started out with the fungus in the first chapter, and it ended up with the frog in the last chapter. It was totally Darwinian in its orientation. Important to know. But when it came to the nature of man, it was penned specifically by Henry Newell Martin in the book The Human Body. And this is what he said in The Human Body. We came across this last week. I'm just summarizing real quickly. I'll just go back here. So this is what he says. But as a material object only do anatomists study man's body, and they therefore classify it among the bodies of other animals according as it differs from or resembles them in arrangement or parts. Therein is Henry Newell Martin's idea of life. The human man is but an animal and can be arranged in the order or the phylum of animal, at least in the hierarchy of animals. He is intellectually there, but physiologically, he is with us. Interestingly enough, Henry Newell Martin was one of the founding members of the American Physiology Society. Just a tidbit right there. Going on. So coming to your view of the nature of man, you have a corresponding nature of disease. So the year that we're looking at is 1876, remember? 1876. Well, these are biologists. Would they have a definition of disease? I'm sure that they would. But who better to turn to for the nature of disease than in 1878? And in 1878, we have Louis Pasteur. So if we turn to Louis Pasteur and we can find out, Brother Louis, what is the nature of disease? Could you please explain that to us? He did that, and I found this quote to be very fascinating. This is what Louis Pasteur says. It's in an article found in I found it on the NIH, the National Institute of Health site. So it's not out there. I mean, it's not away. I'll drop the reference for you shortly. So here we have Louis Pasteur, and Louis Pasteur says to us, "You want to know what disease is?" He's writing to the Academy of Science in France. And in the Academy of Science in France, that was the CDC. You needed to pass their muster. Those were the gatekeepers in France. And this is what he says to them in 1878. He says, "I ask the Academy not to dismiss these curious results before I demonstrate one important theoretical conclusion." In other words, this is what my conclusion about disease is. We insist on demonstrating at the start of these studies that a whole new of knowledge opening, a proof that the cause of transmissible, contagious, and infectious disease resides essentially and uniquely in the presence of microorganisms. I want to stop there, not just for our talk today, but I'm gonna leave it up for those of us who haven't gotten it. But this is the point. The point is that he is identifying disease with the actual microorganism. That is crucial, I believe, and that is the hallmark of disease in the pattern of the divided man, in the pattern of the split man, in the split of the reductionist man. Herein is disease. the proof that the cause of transmissible, contagious, and infectious diseases resides essentially and uniquely in the presence of microorganisms. That is contrasted quite interestingly in the book, The Ministry of Healing. The Ministry of Healing states the nature of disease thus. On page 127, we are familiar with it, but for those who are not, I'm going to go through it. The only hope of better things is in the education of people in right principles. Let physicians teach the people that the restorative power is not in drugs, but in nature. Disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from the violations of the laws of health. In the case of sickness and the cause should be ascertained, unhealthy conditions should be changed, wrong habits corrected, then nature is to be assisted in her effort to expel impurities and re-establish right conditions. Here we have the definition of disease. Disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from the violations from the laws of health. She goes on to say this: pure air, sunlight, abstemiousness, rest, exercise, proper diet, the use of water, trust in divine power. These are the true remedies. Therein are the true remedies. Summarizing, you find the nature of disease according to the reductionistic man is the actual a microorganism, or the presence of the microorganism. In the context of the statement that we read over here, we find that disease, and so let me just stay over here. Then nature is to be assisted in an effort to expel impurities. I would venture to say that viruses and bacteria fall into that category of impurities. These 8 doctors are those that will expel those impurities as we look to this amazing immune system that God has given to us. That is the distinction. The distinction is to try and fight the actual disease, where the disease is defined as the virus or the organism, or to assist the system in strengthening itself with the 8 doctors to go forward in the fight against disease. So that is what we find in our the distinction between the two. Now going forward, the question is: here you have 1876, that's the establishment of Johns Hopkins University. You have the establishment of Battle Creek. Are these two systems ever tested? Are they ever tested? And the answer is yes, they are tested. But you find there is a sad departure when it comes specifically to John Harvey Kellogg. We find that, I've titled this, that this one is on us. We find that by the time 1918 comes around, John Harvey Kellogg has departed Adventism, and in a very startling way, as Sister White described it, she says it was imagine, she had called him, and here we are. He departs from Adventism, And the question is, why is this journey so important to understand? It's important to understand, to see, where did John Harvey Kellogg go? Yes, he became pantheistic. Yes, he did imbibe a teaching that we are definitely, we don't want to go close to. But there are other resources or little hints that he gives, actually huge hints that he gives, of why he left the fold. And it enters into the story of, let me just get to my screen here. Here we go. We find that herein is a departure from truth to eugenics. John Harvey Kellogg, what you see on your left over there is the book I referred to earlier on, where he was giving the view of man. We understand man, we understand him as a whole. And on the right, the yellow form on the right is actually the journal from the Betterment Society that John Harvey Kellogg established in 1914. The question is, what made the departure so grievous, or what made the departure? He says, let me just make sure that I've got it all. Okay, so in 1914 was held the first race, the first Betterment Settlement Conference, when under the, let me see if I can get a larger presentation for myself here. Okay. Okay, so I apologize for that little. Yeah. So in 1914 was held the first Betterment Conference, which under Dr. Kellogg's leadership was organized as the first meeting of the sort ever. The conference was attended by some 250 delegates from all parts of the United States, among whom were found a large number of eminent scientific men and representatives of leading universities, as well as the United States government and state officials and other of the leading thinkers of the nation. This conference, which has been organized as a regular annual event, attracted notice not only in this country, but in foreign lands. Among the various suggestions brought forward, perhaps the most striking was the proposal by Dr. Kellogg to establish eugenics. This is taken from an online resource that I found, and I'll send the link. I'll hook up the link as well. So there it is. Among the various suggestions brought forward at this meeting, perhaps the most striking was the proposal by Kellogg to establish the eugenics registry, the purpose of which is to establish a line of human thoroughbreds. And so here is a sad story of John Harvey Kellogg. But what took him there? What took him towards eugenics? I'm just want to identify to see if it's going to take me to my. I saved it, but I didn't know. Let me see. I need to just establish that before I go on. Here we go. He says, I began to study the study of medicine when at 30, nope, at 20, and graduated. Sorry, that's not the one. Let me just go back a little, just there. Here we go. So this is what he says. Nature has prepared many foods for our use and should accept those foods rather than inferior foods generally accepted today. The natural diet of man is the same as that of the higher apes. Largely made up of nuts, fruits, soft grains, tender shoots, and succulent roots. Professor Eliot of Oxford University said that man is of the Eocene period. The first human beings known was not a meat eater. There was no carnivorous animals and in all the world of that time, and there was not one animal, and there was not one animal of which man was afraid. Herein is one admission of being at least the hint of going back to Darwinian evolution. There is another. Let me see. Yes, I'm sorry. I apologize for this. There we go. Yeah. I had, maybe this is over there. Yeah, it is. I have devoted my life from all the time I was 14 years of age in efforts to find out how to live in the natural, biotic way. When I was 14 years old, I read the statement by Dr. Francis Curry that the natural diet of man is the same as that of higher apes, the chimpanzees, the orangutans, and the gibbon. The gorilla was not yet discovered. It occurred to me that if this was the natural way to live, it was the best way. What happened to Dr. Kellogg is that his departure from the foundation of God having created man in his image. John Harvey Kellogg departed that for the view of man as being as apes. And in a large part, that contributed to his having to find a God somewhere, and he turned to nature, at least God in nature, as the paradigm for trying to join man again. So in the case of Kellogg, I needed just to show that there was a great departure from what God had called him to. And we need to also realize that when we get to 1918, the principles that he had given to us through hydrotherapy and massage had been embraced in a holistic way by those that were following through. So I want to make the point that there were those faithful doctors who studied under Dr. Kellogg, like the next doctor that we're going to be looking at, who summarized the studies of 1918, the pandemic of 1918. And those were doctors that were faithful to how to treat disease and how they viewed man. And I'm going to go on and show that's the next step that we get to. We find 1918. Joyce, is there any question that would be helpful to answer at this point?
I don't see any questions in the chat.
Very good. Okay. So moving along, we're going now to 1918. I wish I'd taken it out a little. So we're looking at 1918, and this is when the test came. 1918 is when the test between these two systems came. The system of the rationalistic, the reductionist man, and treating man according to the principles that God had laid out, the 8 natural laws. We find that the army hospitals the influenza of 1918, as depicted in this article, and is the 1918 influenza pandemic was the deadliest known in human history. The outbreak is of great interest to modern day epidemiologists. So we're looking back. This is an article from 2018, and they're stating in this that we are interested in what happened back there. But the question is, through which prisms are they looking at it? The outbreak is of great interest to modern day epidemiologists, it says, virologists, global health researchers, and evolutionary biologists. That is significant. We will find out why. As opposed to the treatment of in the army by those that were helping the army, I just need to underscore this. I think I didn't state it. Those at Johns Hopkins University at that time were then the premier thought leaders in medicine. And they were the ones who implemented the treatment rationale on their best understanding of science back then. So when we're looking at the Army experience and we're looking at the sanitarium experience, we're looking at the test between these two systems, where Johns Hopkins University had developed 25 years, 37 years into the treatment of man, and now we have a comparative the test they compared against the Adventist or the Sanitarium of that time. So in Life and Health magazine of May of 1919 is where the Dr. Rubel, yes, Rubel, R-U-B-L-E, Dr. Rubel, who was part of the General Conference health team, he aggregated 10, I believe, sanitaria who had numbers on what happened during the 1918 pandemic, and he compared the numbers. He compared the treatment, what they were doing as far as their treatments, with. So let me say that again. So in 1918, the Sanitarium had implemented the 8 natural laws, and they dealt with the cases that came to him based on the 8 natural doctors, and he took the numbers. There was 464 patients there, and these patients were he crunches the numbers for us. So here are the results of the Army hospitals and the sanitariums. So on the left, you have the Army hospital numbers, and on the right, you have the sanitariums. And I need to thank Dr. Roger Swalt for this graphic. The Army hospitals, if you look in and you see phase 1, you'll notice that in the phase 2 rather. So there's phase 2 and phase 3. If you look at the phase 2, there was a 16% of those that had the symptoms who went on to develop pneumonia. And in the sanitariums, there was a 2% of the 464 patients who had the symptoms who went on to develop pneumonia. What was the difference?
Ricky, can I ask you something?
Yes.
This slide, it goes in and out of focus. And I'm noticing that with some of your slides, that it'll go in and out of focus. So I don't know if you're able to keep it so that it'll stay in focus.
Okay, how's that? Is it staying
This is
focused?
fine. This is fine.
Okay, Thank you for that.
Yes.
So here we have the phase 2. There's under the Army hospital, you find there's a 16%, 20% of the camp was infected. Of those, 16%, with all the interventions that the Army doctors implemented, they went on to develop pneumonia. For the sanitarium, the number was 446. Sorry, I said 464. 446 of those, 2% went on to develop pneumonia. So there was an 8-fold decrease in the progression to pneumonia. If you look at the deaths resulted after pneumonia, it's actually a little worse with those that with the sanitarium, but they're comparative, really. So you find that if you look at the bottom number, there is a 6-fold difference in those that died under the Army hospitals as opposed to those under the sanitarium model, where hydrothermal, fresh air, bed rest, sunshine, and the other 4 doctors were implemented. So here we have, there was a pivot following 1918. There was a pivot towards vaccinations, and we won't get into that too much. What next we want to establish is we want to ask, where are we today, and which system of treatment are we applying today? According to the definition of disease with Louis Pasteur, remember, disease is from outside over there. It is to be fought. In this case, it's the Wuhan coronavirus. But we find what has been tried so far with that model. We've tried all our PPE. We've tried social distancing. We've tried masks, and there is not much. There are some. We have tried some medication or medical interventions with not much success. What has not been tried? What has not been tried are these the 8 doctors. There are only 6 listed over here, but what has not been tried is rest, hydrothermal, fresh air, sleep, sunlight, and trust. Of course, peace is trust in divine power. And so this is where we find ourselves. We find ourselves at an impasse. We find ourselves not quite knowing where next to go. It has been proposed that there is a vaccine coming. This, we're looking at a mandatory, at least employer-directed at this point. It is staggered. In other words, it's the health professionals first that are facing this, and then it's also a worldwide. There's a worldwide. It has to be worldwide. Is the insistence that we're finding these people to say, and so what we have next is we have a vaccine coming. The question is, on what basis are these vaccines put together? Because as health professionals, it is the jab or the job. We are needing to understand what is the rationale that this has been put together under. I went to Pfizer's website to find out exactly what is the mechanism of the vaccine, and we find how does the vaccine work. It is the Pfizer one and the BioNTech are focusing on the technology called mRNA. How exactly do the vaccines work? The vaccine is said is a molecule composed of nucleotide links in a unique order to convey genetic information for the cells to produce proteins and antigens encoded by the mRNA. Once the mRNA vaccine is inside the body cell, the cells use the genetic machinery to translate the genetic information and produce the antigens encoded by the mRNA vaccine. The difference over here is in vaccinations to this point haven't seemed to be so invasive as this mRNA vaccine appears to be. The normal process of vaccines is that they were introduced to the system and they were in an attenuated form, and they were never introduced right into the cell as far as they were introduced to the body. The body's mechanism, the development of the mRNA is a process that God has put in place. It is a process that already exists. But what we face now is this mRNA. The origin of this mRNA is not quite known to us. And the reason for this is that it's hidden behind patents. And with patents, we can't quite explore what is the makeup of this mRNA, what are its origins. And so there are questions about its origins and where does it come from, and what the bigger question is, what will its effects be, in this case on the cytoplasm, because the mRNA operates in the cytoplasm. So that is one of the large concerns of the mRNA. A question that I was listening to a podcast by John Barry. John Barry was the gentleman that wrote this book. I still don't have a reverse picture of it. And the book is The Great Influenza. And I was prompted to do some searching, some digging to find out. I listened to a podcast by John Barry. And in that podcast, John Barry mentioned that with the mRNA, there are 3 strands of viruses attached. And these viruses are of different ages. There's an ancient one, and there are different, and there were different, and different other ages. And that got me looking, and I said, so what does that mean? What does ancient mean? And so it got me digging. And I did a search on the internet, and I'm gonna just go forward here. And this is the question that we want to ask. What is the science employed? What science has been employed in the formation of our vaccines, specifically on the mRNA? When I did my research, I came up with a whole field of genomics called the phylogenomic data-driven exploration of viral origin of evolution. This, incidentally, is taken from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. This is an organization, incidentally, that John Harvey Kellogg did belong to. He prized himself of belonging to into this entity. But in the genomic data-driven exploration of the viral origins of evolution, we find that there is a tree of life. This tree of life, what you're looking at right now, is the is the timeline, the pink, I think it starts with the pink and it goes clockwise, clockwise from right to left. That is how they have phylomed, how they've sorted out the viruses that we know and the bacteria that we know. And it is on a genomic, it's on a phylogenomic pattern that decisions are being made towards the forming of which strands to be taken and which strands not to use in this in this mRNA. That got me really thinking and viewing the larger picture. And my question is, that's the question that I have. The question is, could the issue be here? The issue be an introduction of things that do not belong in the human system with this new, very invasive technology. Yes, we heard from the Adventist News Network that the mRNA does not affect the DNA. On face value, I can accept that. But the question that I have is, what are the effects that it has on the cytoplasm, that delicate balance, that delicate system that God has put in place? We cannot be introducing something that's unknown. That is the biggest concern that I have as a nurse. The scientific part of me wants to know what is being introduced, what are the mechanisms of clearing it from the system. That is not known. And it's in light of that I believe that we're facing a Trojan horse. We're facing an unknown, and its effects, from what I've studied, has not been sorted out. This is the experience or the experiment to sort out what the long-term effects are going to be. And so with that as a paradigm, we're finding that there is always a fight between two systems of healing. There are two competing paradigms of health. In the case of Naaman forsook the system of thought that he had to turn to his rivers, and he turned to the obedience and the instruction of the God of the universe, and he was healed. My concern is, are we turning to our God with what he has given us, with the tested ways of healing that we have, as far as the 1918 numbers throw out to us? And it's on that basis I'm urging you to consider, if you are a healthcare professional, consider seriously what God would have you to do. I am convinced that at this point, I cannot go forward and either have it administered to myself or to administer and to follow a doctor's order and administer it to someone else. So my appeal to you is to go back and to be a blessing to those with the 8 natural doctors. Reach out to them and help them if they have been tested positive. Tell them, show them the principles of the 8 natural doctors. I have been so encouraged that I've found many willing hearts and willing ears, and that's the appeal that I have. My appeal is for you to study for yourself. My appeal is to be convinced in your own mind, and that I believe is where we are at in this situation. And I will now open it up to questions.
I have a question. I don't know if you can hear me. This is Alexander.
We can hear you.
Okay, I missed a little part of the presentation. So, and I'm just joining now. I wasn't here last time, so maybe you answered already. But in discussion with some friends who are physicians, Seventh-day Adventists, I asked them about what their view of the vaccine was, and basically, in light of the recent statement from our church when it comes to immunization, and the reasoning in this statement is Ellen White was vaccinated according to her secretary, and then the other reasoning given in favor of vaccination or immunization was that because of the objectionable elements in vaccines that are, some of the elements are unclean, for biblically speaking, and therefore harmful, that the reasoning given that we should not be concerned is that the Bible speaks of consuming or eating, not eating these kinds of foods, whereas in the case of vaccine is like, it goes into your bloodstream, which I thought was very, very weak and unreasonable. I mean, that's why we don't want to eat it, because it goes into our bloodstream, not because if you avoid the mouth, then you're good. But when it comes to me, that wasn't too much of a problem. But the first one, when it comes to Ellen White, vaccinated, what is your view on that, and how do you answer to them? I have my view, but I want to hear somebody else.
Yes, I have done some study into this. You find that that's a 1932 statement by D.E. Robinson, who is saying that she got the vaccine. If you look at her son's recalling of them being faced with the smallpox challenge, he actually says, we spoke to mom, and she didn't have a yay or a nay, and so we decided to go and get it. But nowhere in that statement does he state that that she got the vaccine. So I would rather go with the testimony of her son, who would have told us that she got the vaccine, than to go with D.E. Robinson, who I find him not to be reliable in this case, and so I'd rather go with the son than with the mother, and that's, or I would rather go with the son than to go with D.E. Robinson. Right. Coming back to your question, I also found that the argument that if you take it by mouth, it's fine, but if you're taking it in your arm to save life, it seems to be acceptable. What hasn't been spoken about at all is the Roman Catholics' response to this. And they've said, look, if there's anything unclean in this, we understand, you guys can go ahead and get the vaccine. That is telling in the case that there's an acknowledgement that there are unclean things in there.
You're clarifying. Could you clarify, because it didn't come across that clear? You were saying that the Catholic Church says about the vaccines that if there's anything unclean, that they understand if who doesn't get vaccinated?
Catholics.
Catholics, because
they're
saying that
they'll understand if they'll understand if the Catholics get the vaccine, notwithstanding the origin of its being unclean, or of its being, like, if it's from a human source.
Okay, so they're absolving Catholics.
They are absolving
of any sin for getting this vaccine, even if there's unclean elements in it that make them uncomfortable. They're saying it's okay to do that.
That is right. Sorry if I said it differently. That is the point. I mentioned that to point out that it's very much the same. The statement from the our Adventist source is almost the same, and I find it to be unacceptable. I don't think that it's the reason given by the Adventist News Network.
It was BRI, I think, that gave it. Yeah.
Excuse me.
It was Biblical Research Institute was the one that addressed that point in the statement, but nevertheless, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, it was. So the BRI also had a joint statement, at least in the all three of them stated.
Yeah.
At least the BRI, the health, the General Conference Health Department, and the pharmacist from Loma Linda. I just wanted to let you know, I've been in informal contact with the BRI and in kind of informal contact with the health department of the General Conference too, to voice my concerns. And I encourage you to do that too.
Praise the Lord.
Hey, Ricky. I'm
Go ahead,
sorry.
Tiffany.
Hi. So Ricky, just to be clear, you weren't saying Ellen White was against all vaccines, but this vaccine in particular is more concerning because we don't know the long-term effects, right?
Yes, I'm stating I don't think that Ellen White was categorically against vaccines. She would have stated so to her son. And if I'm looking at the history of vaccines, we also needed to look at, in this context, we have not supposed to be here so long. God wanted to finish the work in the Advent movement in the 1850s. Vaccination would not have been a problem back then. I add that just to say that we just need to look at it in the context of God wanting to finish the work of righteousness in our lives. No, she wasn't categorically against vaccines. Yes, I believe that she would have been very concerned with what we're looking at now.
Ricky, can I just add to this? And then we have a hand up by Stuart, and so we will get to Stuart's hand. I just posted here in the chat a link to Tim Pernick's book. It's on the subject of vaccination. The title is Vaccination, a Petition to the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And if you have not read it or gotten it, I would highly recommend it. It's very well researched. It goes through all of these things. It goes through, what Ellen White, with her son, as well as Robinson. It goes through what our early church leaders felt about vaccinations. And it's very interesting, like the early church leaders were less supportive of vaccinations. For instance, we do not deal in that article. We neither vaccinate our children nor furnish the virus for others to do so. We are as much opposed to viruses and vaccines as we are to drugs and medicines. If people must be sick, they had better have it in a natural way. So there's some differences. And some of our medical leaders supported vaccines for those people who they felt weren't able to live according to the 8 laws of health. It was kind of that paternalistic way of thinking that, how we feel about patients. They're not going to adopt the 8 laws of health, so we'll give them medications. And we don't talk to them about the 8 laws of health many times. And it was the same way of thinking for these kinds of diseases as well. So I would really highly recommend that people look into getting Tim Pernick's book, because it's super highly well researched. And you're going to get a lot of quotes from Wagner, A.T. Jones, and these types of people as well. And so to look into that so everybody can research.
Yes, I just downloaded Tim Pernick's book, and I'm enjoying it. I wish I'd found it earlier. I would have done the historical aspect of the different doctors. David Paulson's one was extremely interesting, because in David Paulson says that we are not of the mindset of drugs, and so he's very strong on what we are really called to be, and that actually makes the point for what God called us as physicians and nurses in this time in Earth's history to be. Yeah.
Yes, because we have to say that there are a few things that we are trying to figure out here. One is this vaccine safe, right? So that's right. One aspect of it. But the other aspect of it is this vaccine comes through a system, a paradigm that is of some paradigm that may be in opposition to God's paradigm of healing, right? We have to consider that possibility.
That's right.
And vaccines throughout history, there are different people who have different views on what the actual history is. And so we have to look to see who's rewriting that history, if so, and who stands to gain from it.
And in addition to that, we need to realize that there is liberty of conscience that God has given to us.
Yes.
And he gives us the ability to say yes to him or no to him. Man is not giving us that opportunity. And that would be one of the hallmarks, I think, of where it comes from, I think.
Yes, and as we look at what's happening even in the church, I posted in our group on Advent Truth today a quote that I had seen a church leader, state that if people are going to be so boorish and inconsiderate about not wearing masks, that they deserve the full brutality of the law, and so it's this type of thing is going to happen for vaccines as well. And so Stuart, could you unmute yourself and you can ask your question? Oh, you're still muted, Stuart.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, there we go.
Now, okay. Ricky, I was wondering, is the main concern that you have about the vaccine the origins of the messenger RNA, or the uncertainty about what the messenger RNA does in the vaccine?
Both. And then in addition to that, so it is both. Both the origin, which raises the ethical questions, and the effects that it has, which raises the remedies that it's going to take to and yeah, you bring up an interesting point, Stuart. All of the vaccine companies have been given carte blanche. There is no legal ability to actually find recourse if it's deemed that they've injured you. So both.
So basically, I guess I have a little bit of a different opinion. I don't know the source, but the messenger RNA is basically, it's like a man-made attenuated virus, basically. It's a copy of the same messenger RNA that's in the SARS-CoV-2 virus that codes for the spike protein, which is part of the virus that the body can react to immune-wise, without the rest of the code for the proteins that hide the virus and that are involved in causing other issues with the virus in people who get severe disease. And in any case, and I fully support the 8 laws of health, and I think that should be the foundation of treatment, especially because of the fact this vaccine, when the virus mutates, is likely not to cover the future one, whereas the 8 laws of health can potentially prevent, disease even for future infections.
So this is my response. So if the 8 laws of health can can help us prevent future iterations of the virus, why wouldn't it be sufficient now without the vaccine?
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
And
but
that's the point.
Getting that knowledge out there is the key.
Yeah,
I mean, I have faith that it is. I don't have scientific knowledge other than the experience with a different virus and the influenza virus in 1918.
Yes.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Dr. Song?
Hi, I'm Margaret Song. I'm a internist in Southern California. I just in addressing the gentleman's point right now, the key difference that I see between the vaccine and an intact COVID virus is that the intact COVID virus, as any virus would be, has enough RNA to code for all the proteins that the virus needs, including a protein that will ultimately destroy the host cell. The host cell will lyse. In a normal viral infection, the virus invades the cytoplasm. The virus is actually a packet of RNA, basically, with a capsid around it. Will invade the host cell, multiply within the cell, and then eventually destroys the host cell, allowing then the new daughter viruses to go and infect nearby cells. And it's during that time that it's scattering around that, of course, the immune system has the opportunity to attack and neutralize the virus. The difference, which to me is very concerning, is precisely the fact that this vaccine is only the spike protein. I mean, I would personally much rather get COVID because the infected cells will then die. With the vaccine, the infected cells survive, which in itself is a problem because now the immune system detects not the spike proteins on virus swimming around, but on your cell. Your cells will express the spike protein. And to me, the setup of your immune system attacking that infected cell, which is your living cell now, is a setup for huge problems down the road. I mean, also, so autoimmune disease is one issue. Normally, a healthy functioning immune system will clear out autoantibodies that we form. And I think that perhaps that's why this vaccine requires multiple doses, because in a healthy person, much of the effect of that vaccine will be neutralized. But we're trying to overcome that with multiple doses. The other issue that I still have to look up, I haven't read, I can't say I have clear knowledge of these details, but I did read that in ferrets and cats, where RNA vaccines were tested in the earlier part of this century, meaning from 2000 or so, most of those were just abandoned because they found that the immunogenic potential of RNA vaccines was so potent that what happened was that when these animals were introduced to other viruses similar to that, that which they were vaccinated against, that they all ended up dying from the future infections because the reaction that their bodies had to these future infections were so violent. My concern is, I do have a real concern of a potential for a COVID-21 or a COVID-22 or a COVID-25 that may have a much more deadly global impact and may in fact have a deadlier impact on those that got the COVID-19 vaccine. And yet that connection may not be traced because it won't be seen as a vaccine side effect, but as death from this new virus. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And then there may be this even more draconian push now at that point. Look, you know, we've got 8 million deaths now. I mean, read the 2010 Rockefeller Foundation report on lockstep. 8 million deaths now instead of what do we have right now? 1.7, 1.8 million deaths globally from COVID-19. So if we get 8 million deaths and nobody's tracking that the majority of these deaths may have happened from people who got the initial vaccine, I think this is a setup for horrendous. I mean, that's when I think that, okay, you're going to get the COVID-23 vaccine, or basically you won't be able to function in society. I mean, that's kind of the, you know, scenario that I'm afraid of. If what's played out in animals actually ends up playing out in humans.
Exactly.
I appreciate that, Dr. Song. There is a warning that we need to be given, or need to be giving. And you see, another word for Babylon is fallen, is Babylon is unsustainable. And this new paradigm that we placed on with vaccines to fight what we're facing is unsustainable financially, but it's also unsustainable, like Dr. Song is sharing, it's unsustainable biologically. And there's no way that we'll be able to point back and say, yep, that's what caused the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yes, these are very sobering things that we're dealing with. The issue is this, and I think that Adventists, just as much as the world, we want to look to our leaders to know what to do. And when we have most of our church leaders, as well as our medical doctors, encouraging this, it is very confusing for the people. And many who don't have a knowledge of science, and many who do, you know, even doctors and nurses who do have a knowledge of science, who might be feeling a little bit unsure about, you know, these issues. Is this a Daniel issue for me? Is this a spiritual issue? When we see so many of these bright lights moving in the direction that everybody in science is, there's a lot of pressure. And I think the easiest thing is to do what everybody else is doing. As Dr. Song was saying, some of these pressures that she's thinking we're going to start facing even more once, if there are issues with a COVID-21 and vaccinated people and that type of thing. We're already seeing that happen small scale right now. Where people are wondering, am I going to be able to keep my job if I don't even get this first vaccine? So we're really needing a lot of fasting and prayer to know individually what to do. And can I go through some of these questions?
Yes.
There's a question that, well, this might be a statement. This is by David. So the vaccine may not contain any evil thing in it, as Dr. Stewart stated, but neither did the challenge facing Daniel's 3 friends. What possible harm would there have been in giving a slight bow to a statue or dead matter? It was the principle of accepting the whole package of placing man's system or power, or placing man's system to determine their fate, their loss of job, their position, their status, their life. Okay, now this is a question by the Pacific Union Native Ministries. I'm sorry that I joined late, so if this question has been asked, please ignore. I understand that there is possibly unclean products in the vaccine. What I have read from our church's position is that if an unclean product is in a medical product, that it is acceptable. Can someone please address this?
Well, the argument that our church gives, if we just look at the reasoning that is given there, is that if you eat it, if it's unclean, then that's what makes it unclean. But if you take it in any other route, it is acceptable.
Is that the Adventist kind of official position? I didn't know that was.
Well, at least if it's for the saving of life, as the statement said. If it's for the saving of life.
You're getting this based upon this latest statement from the Adventist Church.
Yes,
I can't speak. Something that's new, right? Correct.
To my understanding, it's new. To my understanding, it's new, and I don't. It doesn't jive with me, because whatever you eat actually is broken down in its finest detail, and it becomes part of you. That which is good, and that which is bad is dealt with by the body in violent ways sometimes. And God gave us a reason for not giving us unclean things. When a doctor gives me an order as a nurse, he says, okay, give them a drug, insulin. Well, which one do you give them? You give it sub-Q or IV. Of course, you'll be putting them on a drip IV. But that is, there are different routes. It's all going to do the same thing, but just as how fast it's going to do what it needs to do. That's the issue when it comes to the actual route of it. When it comes to the unclean thing, it doesn't for me. It doesn't make unclean clean.
I was just watching a video by a scientist who was presenting in Congress, and he was talking about, for instance, the aluminum nanoparticle technology for vaccines in general. And he was saying that these nanoparticles allow the aluminum to get into the brain, at least in animals. And, the thing is that because it's generally accepted as safe, that technology is not being studied in humans to know if it's behind some of these neurodegenerative issues, some of the issues that we find with children, and their behavioral, emotional, and neurodevelopmental problems. And so these things are simply not being studied. I think we have to understand that once the government accept something as safe. For instance, glyphosate. When glyphosate came into the market, very quickly it was generally regarded as being safe. They did, I think, 6-month studies on these things. They didn't do any really long-term studies, and they said these are bioequivalent crops that you're getting from glyphosate versus non-glyphosate treated crops. And so there was no incentive. There was no reason for anyone to study it further. And if you were kind of blacklisted and made out to be a quack. And so it's the same kind of thing, I think. And so we just have to know, as we're looking at everything, you have to look to see who is sponsoring this, who profits from this. Is it the people? Are the people going to be benefiting from this? And not only that, that's why it's so important for us to be looking to see there's a great controversy. Satan is working to destroy us. He's always going to be putting a counterfeit to cause us to miss the real. And we in the Adventist Church, we know that there's stuff like fake food. I think we're used to looking at it in the obvious sense, like Twinkies and potato chips and that kind of thing. This is fake food. But now that we study more and we understand, actually, when you use something that has glyphosate, it's patented as a mineral chelator, as an antibiotic, and as an herbicide. And so, it's having an effect. It's binding the minerals in your own system once you eat it. It is changing your microbiome from an antibiotic point of view. And so we have to look at all those things. And now, many years later, the public is learning about these things. But we want to be, alert and awake to these possibilities before we allow this to happen.
I want to talk about, just real briefly, if there are any people from overseas over here, we need to realize that the AstraZeneca vaccine is going to be based on DNA. It's a DNA-based vaccine, and that for me is even more troublesome, because that actually enters into the nucleus, and you see, this is the point. We only understand 5% of the function of DNA total. What are the effects that the introduction of this is going to have on even that, on the rest of the cell's function?
You're talking about the 95% that we consider to be junk DNA.
The 95% that we consider to be junk DNA, we don't know what it does. We don't know how introduction of the mRNA from the Moderna vaccine is going to affect that. We can say, oh, it doesn't end up there because it works in the cytoplasm, but we don't know the feedback loop between the nucleus and the cytoplasm with that 95% junk. There's actually a new word for junk. It's called intergenic. So when you see intergenic vaccine or intergenic, it actually means not well understood at all.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And the thing about the AstraZeneca, that's the one that has the fetal tissue from the 14-week-old Caucasian boy from his lungs. And this is a really interesting thing. I was watching Ray Obamsawin talk about the creator's plan. If you look up on YouTube, you can watch Dr. Ray Obamsawin on Amazing Discoveries talk about the creator's health plan. And it really made me think. He was sharing how when we get to Jesus at the judgment, I, as a physician, will have to give an account to Jesus. All the things that I have given to my patients that have possibly caused them harm, I'm going to have to give an account. It really, really made me think. And one of the things that I was thinking about was in terms of when we use these types of things, like for instance, when you make a vaccine and you use the cells of a child who was violently aborted. And you're saying, for the sake of healing everybody, children have to die. To me, it causes us to have to blind ourselves to the extreme cruelty of this type of thing. It is extremely cruel for us to think, for the saving of mankind. People are like, oh, my dad is at risk. My mother's at risk. But, a child had to die to make this vaccine. Are we saying that children have to die to save us? It seems like a very, very convoluted, way of thinking. And I really struggle with that as far as us as an Adventist church saying we're going to go solely with science.
That is true, and I just wanted to address there was a comment in on the Zoom about amalgamation. We need to think about it in terms of that as well. Many times we think of amalgamation on a large scale, but we are looking at man. Like the Bible says that as it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be when the Son of Man cometh. Could this be a possible iteration of that, where there is a manipulation of on the genetic, bringing about a combination of Genesis 1. Genesis says, after their kind. Here we have, I believe, a mixture of viral and yes, it might be messenger RNA, but it is not the way God has intended. The natural process is God orchestrates for the messenger RNA to come from the nucleus. And the communication system is from the circuitry system through the cytoplasm into the nucleus, form the mRNA. The mRNA leaves the cytoplasm or the nucleus and is matured in the cytoplasm and accomplishes God's purpose there. That this man is stepping in and saying, no, 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 we can do this better. And I think that is the issue. That is doing things man's way, or following God's methods like Naaman did, and do it God's way.
I just
think.
a quick. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Alex.
Just gonna say a quick statement, like when it comes to the general idea of vaccination, like, and even if Ellen White was okay with it, even though we don't have a statement from her, and I agree with you that we should not base something on somebody heard her say such thing. If that was something that she wanted to make sure that we are clear on, she would have made a statement, I believe, on that and said yes. But even that, things change. Not maybe every vaccination is not the same. It all depends what goes in it. Like as somebody pointed before, if it's serum of broccoli, I'll take it. But if it's something else, I may not. And you can call it the same. But she has clear statements on the use of drugs if you search it. And that kind of falls in that same category, in my understanding. And she doesn't have anything good to say on drugs, although some point out and say, well, in her days, drugs were poisonous and, there was a lot of quackery. And that's true. There were, drugs that back then that today would consider just pure poison and things like that. But her statements are reaching beyond her time. It's not just for her day. She wasn't a prophet for 1800s only, but to the end of time. So looking at the drug statements and then somehow she's approving of vaccine does not follow in my understanding. But I think the biggest thing is it's a matter of conscience, should not be mandated. Everybody should have a choice, at least. There, I think we all agree on that.
And I think I just want to share with you a quote from Ellen White, okay? It says this: the physician who depends upon drug medication in his practice shows that he does not understand the delicate machinery of the human organism. This goes along with what you were saying, Ricky. When we use these drugs, we don't understand the delicate machinery. He is introducing into the system a seed that will never lose its destroying properties throughout this lifetime. I tell you this because I dare not withhold it. Christ paid too much for man's redemption to have his body so ruthlessly treated as it has been by drug medication. Years ago, the Lord revealed to me that institutions should be established for treating the sick without drugs. And she doesn't say that we should do that when the drugs get better, then we should accept that. She just says we should have institutions that know how to treat people without drugs. Man is God's property, and the ruin that has been made of the living habitation, the suffering caused by the seeds of death sown in the human system, are an offense to God. I mean, this is very sobering. I think, as Adventist physicians, I'm an Adventist physician, and because this is all we know, and we haven't seen, how lifestyle can help with some of these more severe things, we just kind of accept that it's not possible. Which is one of the reasons that I was really happy to meet my friend Mercy, who I do a lot of these things with, because at her lifestyle program, some people think that we're radical and extreme, but sometimes you have to be radical and extreme if you want to do things without drugs. And when you have that faith that it's possible, God really does amazing things. And many physicians and nurses just aren't aware because they haven't been forced to test it out. And so I would just really highly recommend to you that, you know, I know that some of the things that we're talking about sound very radical, but this is an opportunity to put God's word to the test, to grow our faith, and to see what Jesus does. This is the safest place that we can be, to trust in the word of God, even if you make a mistake in that. But as long as you're trusting in God, he is more faithful to us than we can ever imagine to be to him. He will be faithful. So I just want to encourage you with that.
Can you paste the quote somebody asked?
Yes, I will look for
or the source.
Okay.
I can do it if you give the source.
It's letter 73, manuscript 11, 1886, paragraph 57. I'm trying to paste it over here and it's not allowing me to.
I'm gonna try.
Oh.
Yeah, I found that Ricky posted that first, and I've just really been, using that a lot.
Here's the time just to confess, as I'm making this presentation as I'm studying Adventist history, I'm being drawn to deep repentance. Not only corporately to realize what we missed, the opportunities that we missed in the past, but personally, God is calling me away to do things according to his order. And that is asking, for me to depend on him thoroughly. And I have not. And so those who are listening to this, it's not that I've arrived. It's actually, he's convincing me that I've hurt him in hurting his children. And so it's in that context that these things, what I've been sharing with you, it's been coming in droves of regret and pain. But we've got a God in Jeremiah 33. He says, "Look to me, and I will show you things that you know not." It includes the way he's going to provide for us. We don't know right now,
Amen.
But he will show us. He says, "I will heal you." Jeremiah 33, verse 6. It's in that context. It's in the context of Babylon coming in on Jerusalem, on God's people. It's in that context that God is saying, "Look, I am your God. Don't feel abandoned. It feels like I'm far from you, but I love you. I will show you things that you know not. I will heal you."
Yes. Do we have any other questions?
Can I say something?
Yes.
She just posted, and also we just read on Ministry of Healing 127, in case of sickness, the cause should be ascertained. In this case, what is the cause? What is the cause? Like Dr. Raymond Obasaran, he said, he is not the only one. I had heard from so many different sources. The virus is not the cause. The virus is dead. It cannot be reproduced. Why are we worried about the vaccine? The vaccine is not going to help us. If we understand the virus is not true, this is all being manufactured. It's not pandemic, it's pandemic. Why we fall for that? Why we believe in Satan? Why don't we believe in God? That's the question I have.
Okay. Ricky.
So,
Can I jump in?
yes.
Thank you. I'm just gonna, just share from my experience clinically. I don't have, all the answers or anything. It seems to me, I haven't been keeping exact track, but I'm seeing maybe up to some days I'm seeing up to half dozen COVID cases a day now. It's very, very, very rampant right now in Riverside County. well, I might see 9 or 10 COVID suspects, and then when the test results come back, maybe a third of them are positive. I've gotten to where I can pretty much, with, I would say, 80 to 90% accuracy, guess if a patient's going to test positive for COVID, whether they have, based on the contact history, but also based on their symptomatology. And there are flus going around right now. There are other cold bugs that are going around. Sometimes people can have symptoms that don't really look like COVID. Now, I don't think it's not a real disease. I mean, I know there's a lot of speculation about these tests. They're just, like completely goofy tests and all that. I think that the PCR test that we're using actually is probably pretty good. And there's a particular typical COVID patient, that presents. And I would also say that typical patient is only sick for about 4 to 5 days in my experience. It's just in my experience in this location. They present with mild cold symptoms. I have maybe 10 or 20% present with chest symptoms, like chest tightness, some chest pain, or shortness of breath, or cough. But those are in the minority. The vast majority only have upper respiratory symptoms, and they're done with it in a very short time. So, we don't know. And Ricky, maybe you have studied this, what the determinants are, why some people seem to get this violent systemic, reaction to the virus. And for the vast majority, however, it's just a cold. I have speculations that it may have to do with previous either viral infections that certain people may have had, or maybe even previous vaccines that they may have had, as to why some people are getting, this CD8 kind of, more aggressive reaction to the virus. But I would say out of 150 to 180 patients I've seen with COVID, I've only had 4 people be hospitalized so far. And I've had no new hospitalizations in the last 6 to 8 weeks, even though it's spreading like crazy in the community. So I want us to, and I know, you hear the stories from the doctors that work in the hospitals. My brother does ICU work, and they're all terrified. I shouldn't say that about my brother, but anyway, the doctors that work in the hospitals, they're seeing the sickest of patients. Our hospitals are stretched to the limits right now with COVID patients. I don't know that the census is any higher this year than any other winter, but one key difference this winter is that half the staff are out quarantining for up to 4 weeks at a time. So we don't have the staffing, so we're stretched. But from my perspective as an outpatient doctor, very few of the people that come down with COVID are coming down with serious illness, bad enough to be hospitalized.
So I haven't studied it in depth, Margaret, but what I have seen is there was a blood, if you of a certain blood type, there was some correlation. But Dr. Swartz's presentations have been very helpful in showing that the testing positive and the window that you have between your positivity and when symptoms set in, that 5 or 6 day window, it's so important that you actually implement the 8th natural law then. And this is the message that you and I can take with confidence to anybody that is tested positive, because they like, what's the inevitable? The next thing is, oh no, hospitalizations. No, we got hope. There's a God in heaven who has given us natural remedies, and to show them that a positive test is not necessarily a pneumonia case and a death case. So this is real. I believe that it's real, but it's not determinant. It is as soon as we can, as soon as people test positive for it, we and I'm actually implementing it right now. I take hot and cold showers every day, and this is the time to show up the health message and make it a practical part of my life, if ever.
Maybe good just to summarize because there are different understandings of people. You have groups who don't believe this exists at all. It's like completely made up. Then you have people who believe everything that's being reported and are scared to death to take a breath. And then you have people who believe that there is pandemic or there is a virus, but it is not something that we should be afraid to go out, or the whole mask requirement at all times and that such thing. And I will just make a statement and you can address it if you want. My understanding is that there is a virus, as Dr. Song and others have testified, and I have personal friends who had experienced it, that it's worse than a typical flu. Some had it hard, really hard. Some had it nothing serious. So for some people, for a small number of people, can be very dangerous. So for that reason, we should be definitely observing these laws of health. But there's no reason for fear, panic, and the measures are blanketed, and they might be doing actually more harm than good. So that's where we kind of do not necessarily agree or think it's the best approach to this, where obviously we're talking about educating people on the laws of health. That would be the right way to do it. And then maybe there wouldn't be, it would be very few cases of people who would come down seriously if that was the case. I think we all agree on that. So I find myself to be in there, that I believe there is, but nothing to be afraid of. Observe the laws of health, have faith in God. And this masking, I don't think it's really helpful. It may be helpful in certain circumstances if you're sick. If you're sick, then you should always have distance yourself from people, and but I'll let you guys that have more experience comment if you want.
Stuart, is it Stuart or Dr. Stuart? I don't know.
Stuart's my first name. Yeah, I'm a physician. I've been working in an emergency department in Northeastern Oregon since this thing began, since before it began, until mid-October, when I went back into primary care and lifestyle medicine. And my research on this, and I've seen many severe cases as well as mild cases. And the majority of people that get it have mild disease, but if you look at the statistics of those that get severe disease and die, more than 99% of them have an underlying chronic illness, diabetes, chronic illness like type 2 diabetes, hypertension, morbid obesity, coronary disease, and so forth. There's one feature in all of those diseases that's consistent, and that's low-grade chronic inflammation, which is triggered by saturated fat, oxidized cholesterol, ceramide, and some other things like TMAO possibly, that triggers that inflammation. That chronic inflammation dysregulates our innate immune system. And that's why people, they get the initial illness that may not be severe, and then 5 days to 10 days later, when the adaptive immune system is starting to kick in, the viral load has gotten so high because their innate system hasn't been able to eliminate it, that then it overreacts and they get a severe reaction, and their cells get caught in the friendly fire trying to get rid of the virus. And that's why they get severe lung problems and end up on a ventilator and die. All of those chronic conditions are treatable and reversible to a large extent with lifestyle, with proper sleep, unrefined plant-based diet, eliminating oil, sugar, white flour products, eating unrefined whole plants, fruits, grains, nuts, and vegetables, and getting exercise. All 8 health laws are important in that and work together. So if someone is aware of those and is following the health plan, they may get mild symptoms, might get a mild illness from it, but they are not as likely, it's very unlikely that they would get a severe disease and die. Age, I guess, is one of the risk factors because over time the hits our bodies take can cause mutations that can affect. But your physiologic age is probably more important than your chronologic age, and healthy lifestyle can make your physiologic age younger than your actual age. So anyway, that's my experience.
Well, praise the Lord. Thank you for your response and input. It's very helpful to know people who are taking care of patients with COVID, like Dr. Song and Dr. Stewart, what you are doing, and so it's very helpful. Also, Mercy has helped a lot of people remotely with natural remedies by just giving them instructions on how to do these things over the phone. And I think that through her efforts and some of the people that she's working with, hundreds of people are getting better much faster with using these natural remedies. We actually would like to do something to share about that next week and share with people about some of these natural remedies, things that they can do. On Facebook, I'm trying to put up videos to get the word out, because I just feel like the only way we can fight fear is to give people the best advice of what to do, give them recommendations. I had a very faithful Adventist friend. He loves the Lord, very present truth, goes to all the meetings and everything like that. Not a fan of vaccines necessarily, but he's considering it. And it's because he doesn't know what else to do. Because even with all these, he knows about hydro, he knows about all these things, but I think he's seeing Adventists becoming fearful and Adventists getting sick and Adventists dying. And so I guess my question is, at what point are you going to say, okay, it's gotten so bad that I think that the only way to take care of this is the way that everybody is going, or are we going to, stick to what God's plan? Ricky, do you have any ideas about that?
I wasn't listening very carefully. Just asked
because you were looking at some of it. Okay, so I guess I'm wondering this: there are a lot of people in lifestyle, a lot of people at our lifestyle centers who are getting sick, and it's causing people to become fearful. A lot of Adventist doctors are getting sick, and so people are thinking, well, maybe lifestyle only works this well, and we've got to get to this point now where we've got to do these other things, including vaccines.
Yes, part of the 8 natural doctors is trust in divine power, and I'm not doubting that those people that are getting sick don't trust in God. I'm not saying that they don't have faith. There is a link between our thoughts and disease that we need to consider more closely, and the presence of guilt in our lives is also an area that weighs many people down. But we need to realize that Jesus says, where sin doth abound, grace doth much more abound. We have been bought with a price. The truth of Christ's righteousness is more pertinent than ever. That we've been purchased by God, and that needs to be a living reality. And once we make that the focus and the fulcrum, I truly believe that the natural doctors are good, yes, but Naaman didn't trust in that water running in the Jordan. When he came out of that, he says, there is a God in heaven. That is the truth. We've got a God in heaven, but we've got something better. We have God, Emmanuel, God with us.
Amen.
In our struggles, in our positive COVID test. That does not diminish us. It just means that there's something over there that God is going to help us to get rid of. And so it's not time to lose trust. It is time to look to Him even more.
I love that, and I would highly encourage us, let us not be living paralyzed by fear. Okay, so I mean, courage, God tells us, don't fear, have courage, right? He told Joshua that many times. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is being able to move forward and do what you need to do despite your fear. So you're putting your fear in the right place. Yes, Ricky?
I'd like to put it this way. Here are they that keep the commands of God and keep the faith of Jesus. Mm-hmm. You and I have been born at this time in us history because Amen. God has faith in us. Amen. As weak and as broken as we are, it's that faith that we're holding on to. It's His faith in us. He believes in us. It's His courage that He has in us. That is what I'm holding on to, because I can't hold on the courage that I have in myself. Indeed, the faith of Jesus is everything to us right now.
Yeah, Jesus's faith, Jesus's courage, Jesus's heart and mind and love for people, and Jesus's health message. That's what we want to share with the world, because this, I have to share a quote with you. It says this: "The truth for this time, the third angel's message, is to be proclaimed with a loud voice." The third angel's message, meaning with increasing power as we approach the great final test, the Sunday law, spiritual. This test must come to the churches in connection with the true medical missionary work. A work that has the great physician to dictate and preside in all it comprehends. Under the great head, we are to present God's word, requiring obedience to the system of Bible truth, which is a system of authority and power, convicting and converting the conscience. The demand of the word to obedience is a life and death question. So I think, this is a good place to close. It's almost 5 p.m. I just want to share with you this test, this last test is going to come in conjunction with true medical missionary work. We're going to be tested on this as well. And so, for people to think it's just the Sunday law that we need to be concerned about. This is not a biblical precedent that we're seeing. According to the Bible and according to spirit of prophecy, we are going to have a health challenge in the end of time. We're going to need to not only be practicing the health message as medical missionary workers, but I think we're going to have to, as you said, Ricky, have some conviction and repentance come into our own hearts as we realize this true medical missionary work has not been practiced in our church to the degree that God would have it. And that is why our gospel has not had the power that it needs. Amen?
Amen.
Amen.
And it needs to have that power now. For Jesus to come soon, for the world to be lighted with his glory, this medical missionary work has to go forward in a different way.
I'd like to just like to say that the medical missionary work is important. It is the righteousness of Christ lived out. That's what it is, and it's an area of study that we need to embark on now. She says the commandments of God, the faith of Jesus are both important, immensely important. The first part we've understood, the last part we've understood casually. The faith of Jesus should be a study along with all other things, and really, these are exciting times to be around. And thank you so much for giving me the invitation to present the sentiments of my heart.
Praise God. I thank you for your courage, for sharing. I thank you to Dr. Song and to Dr. Stewart for sharing your experiences. It's really helpful. And, next week we want to share about natural remedies and these types of things. So maybe we can, have some of you, even physicians, and medical missionary workers, and share your experiences as well. And that would be a blessing. And so let's close with a prayer. Ricky, would you close for us?
Sure. Father in heaven, we want to thank you so very much that you are our God. Father, I pray that your Spirit will rule in our lives, that we will see the world the way you see the world. Help us to have the love that you have for the world, even those that are calling our decisions and our motives into question. Father, please give us that which we don't have, a love that is winsome, a love, may we be able to draw heat from the coldness of others. And Father, thank you so much that you are going to carry us through financially, emotionally, socially, in every way. Father, I just pray that you'll be with each of the families represented tonight. Father, I pray that you'll be with the leaders of the BRI. You'll please be with the leaders of the General Conference Health Department, and those men and women in responsible positions, Father. I pray, Father, that you will take the work into your own hands and do for us that which we cannot do for ourselves. Thank you now for blessing this new week that we enter into, and those who are in different climes. Thank you that you are Emmanuel, God with us. In Jesus' name, amen.